It should have been just another quiet morning, until the dog stopped. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the mist had. Thick and low, it blanketed the valley like a sleeping ghost, curling around the tires of the old Ford Bronco as it growled its way up the final mile of gravel road. Frost clung to the windshield edges like delicate lace, melting slowly under the defroster. Inside, the silence was only broken by the slow breath of a dog and the occasional cough of an aging man who had seen too much and spoken too little. Reed Callahan didn't talk much these days. Not since Afghanistan, not since the folded flag, not since the doctors told him his lungs would outlive his heart, but not by much. But Shadow, his German shepherd, his former canine partner, his only damn family left, well, Shadow had a way of pulling words out of him without asking for any. They'd been driving for 2 days straight on bad gate and worse roads, following a map that didn't exist anymore, guided only by an iron key and a letter written in shaking, unfamiliar handwriting. The letter had come from a lawyer. The key had come from a ghost. He squinted through the windshield as the Bronco rounded the final bend. The mist peeled away slowly, revealing a narrow trailhead that led into a thick wall of pine and stone. The GPS had gone silent hours ago. No cell signal, no neighbors, just the sound of trees creaking like old bones and the hum of something deeper. Reed cut the engine. It coughed once before dying. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like even the forest had stopped breathing. Then Shadow moved. The shepherd had been sitting alert since Idaho, but now he let out a low, almost imperceptible growl, standing slowly and staring directly into the wall of trees. "What is it, boy?" Reed asked, stepping out onto the frosted ground. His boots crunched like glass underfoot. Shadow didn't flinch. His eyes tracked something unseen, something old. Reed reached for the duffel in the back seat, the one that still smelled like engine oil and hospital soap. It was all he had left, that and the key. The iron key was cold in his hand-forged, heavy, its head shaped like a snarling wolf. A name had been etched on it, J. Callahan, his grandfather, a man Reed never met, a man everyone assumed had died in the Rockies 50 years ago after disappearing without a trace. The letter had been short, no explanations, just coordinates, the key, and a line written in cursive that looked half shaky, half carved into the page. "The mountain remembers. Come alone." He hadn't planned on bringing Shadow, but the moment the dog saw the key, he refused to stay behind. Now standing at the edge of that wall of pines, Reed understood why. They walked the last mile on foot. The trail was narrow, almost overgrown. Dead leaves crunched beneath their boots and paws. At one point, Shadow stopped again, nose high, ears pricked. Reed paused. The forest was still. Too still. No birds, no squirrels, not even wind. They passed through a narrow stone arch, hidden beneath tangled branches. It looked natural at first, until he noticed the runes carved faintly along its base. Not Celtic, not native. Something else. Something older. And then the trees opened. The clearing wasn't marked on any map. It didn't feel like a place found. It felt like a place that found you. There, rising from the side of the mountain like it had been carved by time itself, stood a house. Not a cabin, not a shack. A house made of stone embedded deep into the cliff face. Its walls were dark and weathered, streaked with amber veins. Vines clung to the sides like ancient scars. Above the arched doorway, carved directly into the keystone, was the same wolf's head as the key in Reed's palm. He swallowed hard. "This is it," he whispered. "He really built it." Shadow's tail thumped once. Reed stepped forward and inserted the key into the door. The metal groaned and the lock clicked, not like a deadbolt, but like a stone releasing tension it had held for decades. When the door swung open, the smell hit him first. Not rot, not mildew, rain, cedar, dust that had waited patiently. Light filtered in through cracked stonework. Inside, the walls were seamless, formed of interlocking blocks that fit without mortar. The floor hummed underfoot, faint, steady, like a machine or a memory. Shadow walked in first. He sniffed the air once, then padded forward with absolute certainty, as if he'd been here before. Maybe in some way he had. The main room was vast and cool. At the center stood a hearth of black slate, still filled with logs. Reed struck a match and lit it. The fire caught immediately. No smoke, just warmth. He watched the flames dance and felt something shift. Not in the air, in him. A weight he didn't know he carried lifted slightly. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt expectant. He sat heavily on an old stone bench beside the hearth. Shadow lay beside him, curling slowly, eyes still scanning the room. Reed reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the letter again. He didn't read it this time. He just stared at the handwriting. "Why here?" he muttered. "Why now?" There was no answer. But the house seemed to listen. Before we go deeper into this mystery, if this story pulls you in, take a moment to subscribe to the Heirs story. We've got more to uncover, and trust me, it only gets stranger from here. Reed stood and began to explore. The shelves were carved into the walls themselves. Books lined them, some so old the titles had faded, others bound in materials he didn't recognize. One journal sat at the edge of a desk, spine cracked from time. He opened it. Inside were diagrams, rings, runic symbols, notes written in his grandfather's hand. Energy of stone, resonance through water veins, the mountain hums when you listen. He closed the book, spine snapping like a heartbeat. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a machine, a memory, a message. He turned toward Shadow. The dog was now sitting at the threshold of a hallway leading deeper into the mountain. He didn't move, didn't bark. He simply watched. And then Reed heard it. Not the fire, not the hum. A deeper vibration, faint, from beneath the floor, like breathing. "Is this what you wanted me to see, old man?" he whispered. Shadow rose and stepped into the dark hallway without hesitation. Reed followed. The hallway was colder. Not the kind of cold that came from weather, but the kind you felt deep in your chest, like the hush that follows the final note of a song. Reed moved slowly, one hand grazing the stone wall, the other gripping the small flashlight from his belt. The beam cut through the dark ahead, catching fine dust motes in the air, like glitter suspended in time. Shadow walked a step ahead, alert but calm. His ears twitched at every echo, every shift in tone. Reed trusted him more than any man he'd ever served with. The dog's instincts had saved him more times than he could count, and now he was counting on them again. The hallway narrowed before it opened into a second room. This one was smaller but strangely warm. A single window, carved directly into the stone, let in a beam of soft mountain light. It fell onto a wooden table, covered in old maps, brittle notebooks, in a thick glass jar half filled with something that shimmered faintly, like liquid gold. Reed stepped forward and touched the jar. The liquid inside moved. No, pulsed. The same rhythm as the floor's hum. Shadow growled, not aggressive but alert. His gaze locked on the corner of the room where a low cabinet stood partially open. Reed crouched and pulled the door fully ajar. Inside, folded carefully and wrapped in oilcloth, was a small tin box. It was heavy, sealed with a rusted latch and engraved with initials. J.C., his grandfather. He opened it slowly. Inside, there were old photographs, worn and curled at the edges. One showed a younger version of his grandfather, standing in front of the very same stone house, beside a man Reed didn't recognize. The stranger's face was smudged, as if aged by time more than ink. Behind them, half hidden in the photo's shadows, was a large stone marker carved with a spiral. He flipped the photo. On the back, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "If you find this, the mountain hasn't forgotten you." Reed exhaled, trying to steady the strange tightness in his chest. He didn't believe in ghosts, but this felt like something reaching out. He took the other contents from the box, a compass that spun erratically even while lying still, a torn patch from a military field jacket, and finally a piece of paper so old it cracked slightly when he unfolded it. A hand-drawn map, one he hadn't seen before. It was detailed and purposeful. The house was marked with a triangle, but lines extended beyond it, through the woods, up the ridge, all converging on one mark labeled in large capital letters. Root Core. He studied the trail's curves and the ridges noted in small script. The path didn't appear on any GPS. He'd know. He'd tried. Shadow whined softly. Reed looked down. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" The dog walked to the edge of the room and pawed lightly at the stone floor near a narrow crack. Something about it shimmered, barely visible unless you were looking. Reed knelt. The crack ran in a circle, almost perfect. Faint etchings, no wider than thread, were carved along its perimeter, spirals and lines similar to the ones on the map and the cabinet photo. His fingers traced one ring. The stone was warm. He pulled back. Shadow backed away slightly, ears low but steady. Then Reed heard it. A soft click. The circle in the floor shifted. Stone moved against stone, with a sound like thunder buried deep. Dust rose in lazy swirls as the circle lifted slightly, then split down the center. Beneath it, steps. A spiral staircase descending into blackness. Reed stood slowly. This is what he wanted me to find. Shadow didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the first stone step, looked back once as if to say, "Coming?" Reed followed. They descended carefully. The steps were worn smooth but stable. Every few feet, faint runes glowed in the walls, casting soft amber light without any visible source. The air was warmer now, thicker. It carried a scent Reed couldn't quite place: earth, metal, maybe cedar. He didn't know how far they went. Could have been 20 feet or 100. Time felt weird in this place. Distance, too. Finally, the stairs ended. They stepped into a massive chamber. It was unlike anything Reed had ever seen. The walls curved high overhead, like the inside of a dome carved straight from the mountain. Veins of light ran across the ceiling, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. In the center of the room, suspended inches above a stone pedestal, floated a translucent sphere the size of a basketball. And inside it, light, swirling, alive. Shadow sat perfectly still. His eyes never left the sphere. Reed stepped forward. The hum in the walls deepened with every inch. He reached out slowly. The moment his fingers brushed the surface of the sphere, it lit up, flooding the room with golden glow. Reed gasped and staggered back. His vision was suddenly filled not with images but with feelings, echoes, sensations, a rush of warmth through his limbs, the smell of pine needles in the rain, the weight of grief and the release of forgiveness, the sound of his grandfather's voice, not words, but intention. The message was clear. This wasn't a weapon, it was a gift, and it was meant to be protected. Reed opened his eyes. The chamber was quiet again. The sphere dimmed, hovering gently like before. Shadow stepped beside him and leaned gently against his leg. Reed placed a hand on the dog's head and stared at the sphere. "We're not alone here, are we?" Shadow didn't move. Reed turned back toward the stairs. They had answers now, but also more questions than ever. Back in the stone house, night had fallen. The fire in the hearth still burned, low and steady. Reed sat beside it, the map laid out across the floor. He'd marked several of the etched locations from the photo, cross-referenced them with what he saw below. Something about the design, the geometry, was deliberate. This wasn't just architecture. It was a system, a living one. He sat back, exhausted but clearer. The mountain wasn't just stone, it had memory, it had rhythm, and now it had him. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt like home. Sleep came in strange fragments that night. Reed lay on the stone-framed bed beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of pine and dust. The fire down the hall had settled into a low, crackling rhythm, but the hum beneath the stone floor hadn't ceased. It rose and fell like the breath of something ancient. Shadow slept lightly at the foot of the bed, always halfway between rest and readiness, his ears twitching now and then at sounds Reed couldn't hear. Sometime past midnight, a memory pulled him awake. His son's voice, clear as day, laughing, then gone. Reed sat up slowly, breathing shallow, staring into the dark. The air felt heavy, not threatening, just old, like it had waited too long to be disturbed. He stood, shrugged on his jacket, and stepped into the hall. The fire had died down but still glowed beneath the slate hearth. Reed knelt beside it, reached into the shadows where earlier he'd noticed a slight draft slipping through a thin crack between stones. His fingers brushed something rigid, a seam. He pressed lightly, and a hidden panel shifted. Behind it was a shallow cavity in the wall, barely a foot deep, and inside sat a small, rusted lockbox. Not built into the house. Left there. Shadow padded beside him, tail still and low. He sniffed the box, then let out a short huff. No danger, just curiosity. Reed carried the box to the table, laid it gently on the surface, and opened the latch. Inside was a leather-bound field journal, the kind military officers used decades ago. A dog tag hung off the spine, still clean enough to catch the firelight. Reed lifted it carefully. James R. Callahan, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. His grandfather. So the old man had been military after all. Reed opened the journal. The first page held a sketch, hand-drawn but precise. It was the same spiral chamber he and Shadow had discovered below the mountain, complete with the glowing sphere. Notes in the margins labeled components: core housing, vein entry point, pressure calibration. It looked more like an engineering schematic than a journal. As he flipped through, The writing shifted from scientific notes to personal observations. July 18, 1973. The stone hums louder the closer I work to the vein. This is not geothermal, it's biological. I'm convinced now the mountain is alive in a way we don't understand. August 1st, 1973. The team is gone. They wanted to weaponize it. I sent them back, told them there's nothing here. They didn't believe me, but they didn't find the chamber either. I buried the entrance. Only I know where it is. Reed swallowed hard. So his grandfather hadn't disappeared. He'd stayed to protect something. Lied to the government. Chose solitude over submission. Another entry stood out, dated the following year. April 4th, 1974. The hum changes when I speak to it. I know how that sounds, but it responds, not like a pet, not like a machine, more like a memory that listens. One night it played back my voice, not a recording. A moment, the day I left home, it remembered for me. Reed leaned back in the chair staring at the journal. His fingers trembled. It wasn't just technology buried in this mountain. It was intention. He turned another page and stopped cold. A photograph was tucked into the binding, folded once. He unfolded it slowly. A black and white image, faded but clear. A young man, his father, barely 20, standing beside the same stone marker from the previous photo. The spiral was clearly carved into its surface. Shadow's silhouette, a much younger version, stood behind him. Reed's breath caught. He had never known this photo existed. He had never known his father came here. And that dog, it wasn't just a similar breed. It was part of a line, a legacy. Shadow stared at the image too, head tilted. You knew, Reed whispered, didn't you? Shadow said nothing, but he sat up straighter as if the silence confirmed it all. The realization hit like a punch to the chest. 3 generations of Callahan men, all tied to this mountain, all haunted by the same heartbeat in the stone. And the dogs had remembered. Reed took the journal outside. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the peaks with a burnished copper hue. He stood on the stone porch and breathed in air so clean it hurt. Down in the valley, the trees whispered in windless rhythm. He turned to Shadow. We need to find that marker, he said. If my father stood next to it, there's more down there than we know. Shadow barked once, sharp and eager. They packed light, flashlight, rope, small rations. Reed strapped the journal into his pack. Shadow carried his gear in a lightweight harness, already worn from years of field use. They followed the edge of the mountain trail outlined in the hidden map. It was narrow, winding, and overgrown in places, but not impassable. The air thinned as they climbed, but the hum from the stone never faded. At one point, the trees cleared, revealing a flat shelf of rock extending out like a finger over the forest. Shadow stopped suddenly, sniffed the air, then ran ahead. Reed followed, and there it was. The marker, a stone monolith nearly 10 feet tall, weathered by wind but unmistakable. Spirals carved deep into its surface pulsed faintly in the sunlight. Reed approached slowly. The hum under his boots matched his heartbeat. He crouched, brushing away layers of moss and dirt from the base. There, a keyhole, identical to the one on the house's front door. He reached into his coat and pulled out the iron wolf head key. It slid in perfectly and turned. The earth trembled. The spiral seams surrounding the monolith shifted. And from beneath, stone began to retract, revealing a wide, circular hatch. Shadow whined low but didn't retreat. Reed stared into the opening as stairs began to reveal themselves again, descending deeper into the mountain. No lights this time, just stone and silence. He clicked on his flashlight and looked at his partner. You ready? Shadow barked softly and moved ahead, tail steady, gaze focused. Together, they stepped into the dark again. This time, Reed wasn't scared. He was home. The descent was colder this time. Reed's boots echoed against the stone steps, the sound dulled by the walls that seemed to drink in every noise. Shadow padded silently ahead, sure-footed despite the darkness. The flashlight in Reed's hand flickered once before holding steady, casting narrow beams of light across the ancient rock. These weren't just stairs. They were carved with purpose, angled in a way that suggested precision, not erosion. Someone had planned every inch. Maybe not recently, maybe not even in his grandfather's time way, but someone had come before. Someone who knew the mountain's pulse. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. It wasn't foul or stale. In fact, it smelled faintly of cedar and something metallic, like a thunderstorm before the lightning hits. And then the stairs ended. They stepped into a vast underground room, dome-shaped like the chamber before, but older, rawer. The walls weren't polished stone this time. They were jagged, cracked, and laced with glowing threads of amber light that pulsed slowly like veins carrying blood. In the center stood a raised platform, circular and low, maybe 2 feet tall, made of black stone. On it sat a single item, a military-issue satchel. Reed's heart caught. He approached carefully, his breath shallow. Shadow sat at the edge of the platform, watching him, unmoving. The satchel was old, dust-covered, but intact. He brushed the top gently and flipped the latch. Inside were personal belongings, a small leather notebook, a pair of broken sunglasses, a lighter engraved with initials that made his stomach twist. T.C., his father, Thomas Callahan. He hadn't seen that lighter since the funeral. It was the only thing the Army had returned from his father's deployment. Reed remembered holding it at age 10, not understanding why everything else was gone. No medals, no boots, just a lighter that didn't spark anymore. He picked it up now. It was warm. The dog's ears twitched. Reed opened the notebook with shaking hands. The writing was his father's, a mix of blocky caps and rushed cursive, still sharp despite the years. The first page was a simple list: dates, coordinates, power readings. Then, buried midway through the second page, a single sentence leapt out. Dad was right, it's alive down here, and we're not alone. Reed closed his eyes. 3 generations, all pulled into the same current. None of them could walk away. He flipped ahead. I told them it wasn't safe to dig past the 4th vein. It pulses like a heartbeat. The more they drill, the more unstable it gets. I think it remembers pain. Every time they breach a new channel, the lights change. The air changes, it fights back. Reed leaned against the stone pedestal, overwhelmed. This wasn't just memory. This was a confession. His father had come here, had warned them, and he hadn't been believed. The lighter in his hand clicked, open. And this time it sparked. A tiny flame danced, reflecting off the stone, the satchel, the journal pages. He stared at it like it was a message from the grave. And then the hum deepened. Not like a machine, like a voice. Shadow stood up suddenly, his head tilted toward the back wall where the amber veins glowed brighter. Reed turned. A small opening had appeared. No sound, no shifting stone, just there. Like it had been waiting for him to find this first. He stepped through with Shadow close behind. The tunnel was narrower, only wide enough for one person at a time. The glow from the walls gave off enough light to see, so he pocketed the flashlight. After a short walk, they emerged into another chamber, this one much smaller. The walls were smoother here, less natural, more designed. At the far end, a wall-sized slab of stone bore an engraving. Reed walked closer and realized it wasn't a language. It was a diagram. Spirals, pathways. One central source surrounded by 7 lines radiating out. It was a power structure. The mountain was wired like a body. And at its heart was the chamber they'd first discovered. He noticed another item tucked into a niche below the slab. A cassette recorder, the kind used in the field during the Cold War era. Still intact, battery compartment, slightly corroded, but the tape inside looked clean. He pressed play. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, his father's voice. If anyone finds this, I hope it's Reed. Reed's knees buckled slightly, and he leaned against the wall. I know we never talked much. I know I wasn't around. I thought I could fix that by serving something bigger. But this mountain, it's not just a place. It's a keeper of memory, a mirror. Dad stayed behind to protect it. I tried to do the same, but I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people, and now they're coming again. Reed, if you're here, it means you have the key. You've always had it. In your hands, in your heart. Listen to Shadow. He knows the rhythm. This place doesn't need another soldier. It needs a guardian. The tape ended. Reed didn't cry, not fully, but the ache that sat in his chest like a stone just under the skin shifted. A part of him wanted to scream. At the years he'd spent angry at a man who hadn't abandoned him but had died trying to save something. At the years lost to silence. Instead, he reached out and touched the wall. The stone pulsed once beneath his fingers, warm, forgiving. He whispered, I'm listening now. Shadow pressed against his leg, quiet and solid. They sat there for a long while. No words, just breath and heat and the heartbeat of the mountain around them. Eventually they rose and retraced their steps. The satchel was placed back gently, the notebook inside. Reed kept only the lighter and the recording. Outside, snow had started to fall again, light and quiet. The valley was still. The air tasted like something ancient being remembered. Back at the house, he lit the hearth again. The fire caught immediately. Shadow settled beside him, his head resting on his paws, tired but watchful. Reed stared into the flames. His grandfather had kept the secret. His father had died trying to protect it. Now it was his turn. He reached into the drawer beneath the table and pulled out a fresh notebook. He opened to the first page and wrote, "The mountain doesn't forget. It just waits until you are ready to hear." The wind shifted the next morning. It wasn't just weather, it was a feeling. Reed stood on the stone porch, a mug of black coffee in his gloved hands, watching the frost melt off the pine branches. Shadow sat beside him, ears alert, eyes scanning the valley. Nothing looked different. The trees stood the same. The ridge wore its usual coat of snow, but something had changed in the air, something unsettled. Shadow growled, low, deep, a warning sound from his chest more than his throat. Reed didn't ask why. He didn't need to. They went back inside, bolted the door, and moved through the old stone house like men preparing for a siege. He didn't know who was coming, but someone was. By noon, tire tracks cut through the lower edge of the valley. Reed watched them from the tree line, binoculars steady, breath fogging the lenses. A black SUV sat half-hidden behind a rocky outcrop. The plates were government, but not military. Too clean, too quiet. 3 men stood nearby, dressed in dark parkas, surveying the ridge like they were casing a job site. Reed recognized the posture. These weren't hikers. They weren't researchers. They were contractors, private, armed, professional. One of them knelt by a patch of disturbed snow, pulled out a metal rod, and stuck it into the ground. A handheld reader beeped softly, then faster. The man nodded, said something Reed couldn't hear, and pointed directly toward the coordinates of the chamber. They knew. They didn't know everything, but they had enough. He crept back uphill, Shadow moving silently beside him. Every crunch of snow under boot felt like a countdown. Inside the stone house, Reed unrolled the hidden map on the table and stared at it hard. Every chamber, every vein, every pressure line was part of something deeper, something fragile. If they cracked the wrong part open, they wouldn't just find energy. They'd wake something that didn't want to be disturbed. He marked the ridge nearest the spiral chamber in red ink. They were only a day, maybe hours, from reaching it. Shadow stood at the door, body tense. Reed stepped outside to check the perimeter. That's when he heard the drone. High-pitched, fast, coming from the east. He barely turned before he saw it. A black surveillance drone buzzing the treetops, scanning with a green laser that swept the ground like radar. He ducked behind a boulder. Shadow barked once, sharp, angry. Too late. The drone veered hard and circled back, stopping directly over the clearing. It hovered for a second, then zipped back toward the valley. They saw us, Reed muttered. He ran back inside and locked the door behind him. We're out of time. The storm hit just before nightfall. A real one. The kind that rolls in fast over the peaks, dragging ice and thunder in its teeth. Snow came sideways, driven hard against the stone walls, howling through the cracks like voices in the dark. Reed lit the lanterns. The fire burned hot, but nothing shook the cold growing in his gut. He checked the rifle, not because he wanted to use it, but because he might have to. He packed Shadow's harness with a field med kit and emergency rations. He laid the iron wolf head key beside the hearth. Then he waited. At 2:17 a.m. they came. No headlights, no voices. Just the crunch of snow under deliberate boots and the whisper of equipment being unpacked. Reed watched through the slit in the stone shutters. 6 of them, all geared up. One held a tablet scanning the perimeter. Another carried a metal case that pulsed with a low green glow. Shadow growled beside him, teeth bare but silent. One of the men knelt near the spiral stone marker and brushed snow off the keyhole. Reed's heart sank. They didn't come to search. They came to open it. He grabbed the key off the hearth, slung on his coat, and opened the side hatch that led to the slope above the ridge. The snow was blinding, but he knew these woods. He'd spent the last 3 weeks mapping every trail, every blind bend. He moved fast and low, Shadow behind him, silent as a ghost. He circled around this ridge and reached a vantage point 50 feet above the stone marker. Below, they were lowering some kind of drill into the seam of the stone ring. Reed exhaled. If they cracked that open the wrong way, he whistled, sharp and fast. A warning! The lead contractor looked up, motioned to his team. Identify yourself, someone shouted. Shadow growled at his side. Reed stood and yelled back, back away from the marker. You don't know what you're about to open. They spotted him. 2 broke off and started up the slope. Shadow waited for the signal. Reed whispered, stay. But when the first man reached the midway point, rifle aimed, Reed fired a single warning shot into the snow next to his boot. The man flinched, slid backward. Then the chaos hit. A third man, still by the marker, slammed something into the seam. The stone ring pulsed red. A deep vibration shook the ground. The forest groaned like something waking up. Shadow barked, once, twice, then lunged past Reed and down the slope. He struck the armed man before Reed could yell. There was shouting, scattering, a burst of light from the scanner case as it overloaded and sparked. Reed reached the marker just in time to see the stone crack in two, with a roar that felt like thunder from the bones of the earth itself. The contractor screamed and fell back. The globe beneath the ring exploded in white light, brilliant and violent. Reed shielded his eyes. Shadow yelped, then silence. He woke in the snow, not sure how long it had been. The marker was gone, retracted fully into the earth. Only Shadow's face hovered above him, eyes wide with worry. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely, reaching out. Shadow licked his hand and nudged his shoulder. Around them, no sign of the intruders, only broken gear and heat still pulsing from the stone beneath. Reed struggled to his feet. The storm had cleared. The sky above was open, stars burning cold and fierce. But the damage was done. They'd awakened the chamber. And the mountain had responded. Back at the house, Reed laid the journal on the table and wrote, "They came looking for power. What they found was a warning." He looked at Shadow, curled up beside the hearth, a thin cut on his leg already cleaned and bandaged. "You saved me again," he whispered. The dog thumped his tail once. Reed stared into the fire. They'd be back. More would come. But this place wasn't just stone and secrets anymore. It was his now, and he would protect it with everything he had left. Even if it meant war, the snow held their footprints like a confession. By morning, the storm had cleared completely. A hush lay over the ridge. Not the soft silence of snowfall, but something deeper. An aftermath. Reed walked the perimeter at first light, shotgun across his shoulder, Shadow tight to his side. They followed the trail of broken branches and half-buried boot prints down to the valley's edge, where the contractors had first appeared. The black SUV was gone, just tire ruts frozen into the dirt and one shattered piece of equipment left half-buried in a drift. A scanner dish, still humming faintly, sparking now and then with dying battery pulses. Reed kicked it once, hard enough to silence it. No bodies. No blood, but they'd been shaken, and maybe that bought him time. Still, it wouldn't be enough. He knew men like that. They didn't scare easy. They didn't give up, and they sure as hell didn't like to lose. Shadow nudged his leg. "Yeah, I know," Reed muttered. "They'll be back." He looked up at the mountain. It looked still, but he knew better now. It was listening. Back inside the house, Reed laid a fresh log in the hearth and turned to the stone wall where he'd hung his father's dog tags. The lighter sat beneath it on the mantel. He lit the fire and watched it catch before walking over to the desk. The notebook, his father's, still lay open, pages warped slightly from the heat and age. He'd read it 3 times since the night of the attack. But he kept going back to the last line. This place doesn't need another soldier. It needs a guardian. He hadn't always known how to be one. But now he didn't have a choice. Shadow lay curled on the rug, one paw resting over the field med kit Reed had used the night before. The cut on his leg was healing cleanly, but he moved slower this morning, worn down from the chaos, just like Reed. Reed poured some food into the metal bowl and sat beside him. Shadow ate quietly, chewing with focus, eyes never leaving the door. The old instincts, still sharp. Reed reached for the lighter again, flicked it open. A tiny flame. It always lit on the first try now, as if the mountain remembered who it belonged to. Later that day, Reed cleared out the back corridor of the house, the one with the sealed door that had remained locked since he arrived. He hadn't dared open it until now. But something inside the last contractor's case, left behind after the chaos, had changed his mind. Among the damaged electronics was a file, corrupted, mostly scrambled, but one part remained legible. Subject property Callahan Ridge Site B, estimated core viability, 87%. Secondary chamber detected, access unknown. Source, Mahari Mendez, field documentation. Mahari. Reed hadn't heard that name in 20 years. A field researcher his father had once mentioned, back in one of the rare letters from overseas. She'd worked with his unit on civilian recovery and infrastructure during early deployments. Smart, quiet, a believer in old systems, forgotten technologies. She'd gone missing in 2006, presumed dead, but her name was attached to this. And if she'd found a second chamber, Reed turned to the sealed door. The key slid in easily. Inside was a short, square room lined with shelves, some holding rusted tools, others filled with bundled files wrapped in canvas. He lit a lantern and stepped inside. The dust danced like snow. On the far wall hung a blueprint, not paper, cloth. It had been staked in place with nails, preserved with a thick layer of wax. He stepped closer. The layout was unmistakable. The mountain, veins drawn like rivers, all converging at two nodes, one marked core chamber, the other labeled only as the vault. No coordinates, no trail. But there was a note written in red ink at the bottom corner. For the heir, if he finds the light, he'll find the way. He stared at the word heir for a long time. It wasn't a mistake. His grandfather had known. His father had known. This wasn't just legacy. It was deliberate, a line carried forward on purpose. He turned, grabbed the canvas bag beside the blueprint, and carried it back into the firelight. Inside, among yellowed folders and wrapped bundles, was a small square recorder, older than the one he'd found before. He dusted it off, flicked the switch. Static. Then a voice, not his father's. Older, rougher. You're here because you were chosen, not by blood, not by rank, but by what you've carried silently. If you're holding this, it means the world is hungry again, and it'll try to take what it doesn't understand. Reed swallowed. His grandfather. The vault is not power, it's preservation. Memory carved into the body of the mountain. I didn't build it, I uncovered it, but the work that came after, that was mine. Yours now. Use it only if the world forgets what kindness sounds like. The tape stopped. The fire crackled behind him, throwing orange light across the stone walls. Reed sat for a long time, holding the recorder like a relic. Shadow lifted his head and stared. You think I can do this? Reed asked softly. Shadow just blinked, as if to say, you're already doing it. That evening, Reed went outside and climbed the trail past the spiral marker, beyond the ridge where the chamber had once opened. Snow had melted in perfect circles near the pulse points of the mountain, signs that it was still alive, still listening. He stood there until dusk, wind curling around him, the cold biting but clean. Then, as the sun dipped below the tree line, he saw something move in the far distance. Across the next ridge, a figure, alone, wrapped in a dark coat, carrying a pack. Not a soldier, not a contractor, just a traveler. Reed stayed still, watching through his binoculars. The figure didn't approach, didn't call out, just stopped for a moment and looked toward the mountain, then turned and vanished into the trees. Not a threat, not yet, but a sign. The story was spreading, and that meant it was time to prepare. Not for war, but for understanding. He hiked back down in silence, the wind whispering through the pines like a voice older than words. That night, in the flicker of the hearth, Reed opened a fresh page in his father's notebook and wrote, "The vault exists. It holds not weapons, but warnings. And in its silence, it asks us one thing: be better than those who came before." Shadow's breathing slowed beside the fire. Outside, snow began to fall again. And somewhere, buried in the roots of the earth, the mountain pulsed on, slow and steady, like a heart waiting to be heard. The first day of spring came without announcement. No trumpet of birds, no grand thaw, just a shift, quiet and honest. Reed noticed it before the sun was even up, standing outside with Shadow on the porch. The snow that had clung stubbornly to the ridge began to slouch. Water trickled down stone where ice used to sleep, and for the first time in months, he didn't brace against the cold. He stood there longer than usual, coffee warm in his hand, watching the sky bloom from steel gray to a soft, forgiving gold. Shadow sat at his feet, tail curled around his legs, chin lifted. Together, they listened, and the mountain, ever silent, ever watchful, pulsed below them like a steady, aging heart. Life had fallen into a rhythm, not like before, not military precision, not survival instincts either. Something slower, more deliberate. Reed rose with the sun, gathered wood, made repairs to the stonework, read old field notes, and copied fresh ones into his own growing journal. He'd begun carving new runes into the exposed stone near the fire pit, not because he had to, but because it felt right. Felt like he was speaking the mountain's language, one line, one echo at a time. Shadow grew older too. His eyes, still sharp, had a misty glaze now in certain light. He took longer to get up after naps, but he never missed a perimeter walk, never let his nose rest. He moved like an old soldier, slow, sure, always present. They were aging together, and somehow that made it easier. 2 weeks into spring, a letter arrived. No return address, no name, just a wax seal, pressed with a spiral symbol Reed recognized immediately. The same one from the marker, from the vault. He opened it slowly. Inside, a short note, typed on thick parchment. The videos never showed the location, but the story spread. Quietly, softly, like you asked. The mountain is still protected. We're still listening. He didn't need more than that. Mahari Mendez was still alive and working from the shadows. He hadn't asked her to keep the secret. She'd chosen to. That, more than anything, gave him hope. Not for the mountain, but for the world outside it. Summer came, shy at first, then in full. Wildflowers crept through cracks in the stone path. The air grew thick with scent. Pine, earth, something sweet and unfamiliar. Reed started planting. Not much, just a few vegetables, herbs, sunflowers for the bees. Shadow liked to lie beside the garden, nose twitching in the breeze. Every now and then, hikers passed the lower trail, never venturing close, always commenting on the strange warmth in the wind, the way their cell signals vanished for hours, the whisper in the woods. He never confronted them, never chased them off. The mountain did that on its own. The fog would rise when needed, and the path would disappear like a dream you couldn't quite remember. The vault stayed sealed, but its presence never left. Sometimes when Reed walked the perimeter at dusk, he'd feel the pulse underfoot, slow and steady, like a reminder. We're still here. And so are you. Late one night, Reed woke to find Shadow not at the foot of the bed. He panicked for a second, heart jumping like a punch to the chest, but found the dog lying in front of the hearth, staring at the wall. The old lighter flickered on the mantel, casting a soft amber glow. Reed sat beside him. "You feel it too," he whispered. Shadow didn't look at him, just blinked slowly like an answer. That night, they sat side by side, watching the fire until dawn broke. No words, just presence. Years passed like that, not rushed, not wasted, just lived. And Reed, once a man buried beneath memory and war and silence, found something new inside himself. Peace, not perfection, not freedom from pain, but peace, the kind that comes when you stop running, when you listen. One morning, he woke with a weight in his chest, not fear, not sadness, but something softer. He knew his time was winding down. He could feel it in his bones, in the way his lungs caught on cold air, in the heaviness behind his eyes. He didn't fight it. He just went about his day like always, watered the garden, split some wood, read from his father's journal, then lit a fire and sat beside Shadow for hours, rubbing the old dog's ears, both of them too tired to move. That night, he wrote one final entry in his own notebook. The mountain chose us, and we chose to stay. We didn't conquer anything. We listened. We protected. And when the time comes, someone else will too. He sealed the journal, placed it in the same hidden chamber beneath the hearth where his grandfather had left the first one. He laid a new stone over the spot, marked it with a carved spiral, and whispered, "For the next one." A season later, Shadow passed in his sleep, peacefully, head on Reed's boot, breath slow and easy, no pain, no sound. Reed buried him at the edge of the garden, beneath a crooked pine where the sun rose each morning. He carved a simple marker from a slab of slate and etched one line into it. He listened better than most people ever do. The house felt emptier, but not lonely. The hum remained. The fire still lit on the first match. And the mountain, faithful and quiet, kept breathing. One autumn morning, a new figure stood at the edge of the tree line. Young, shoulders heavy like they'd carried things too long. Behind him, a German shepherd puppy sat in the grass, tail thumping nervously. The man stepped closer, staring at the stone house with wide eyes. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He just placed his hand on the wall as if he felt it humming. Reed watched from the window unseen and smiled. Somewhere, deep below the mountain, the vault pulsed once. Just enough to be felt. Just enough to say, "It's your turn now." Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you were given the key, would you choose to guard the secret? Let us know what you would do. Until next time, listen well and take care of the silence.